Hey everybody, my name's Elaine, and today I'm going to be talking about the Caraval series. Sometimes they're referred to as the Caraval novels or the Caraval trilogy. They're all written by Stephanie Garber. The first novel in the series is Caraval. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy to show you because I had to return it to the library. Anyway, the novel talks about Scarlett and Donatella Dragna. They're two sisters who live on the Isle of Trisda, and they long to get away from there because it's very boring, there's nothing going on, and their father is very controlling, and they're not fond of that. The girls also want to experience Caraval, which I would describe as a mixture of fairy tales, carnivals, and Ren fairs. It's basically just this performance that takes place annually, typically. Scarlett wants to experience Caraval so much that she writes to Caraval's master legend every year, basically begging him to bring Caraval to Trisda so she can experience it. After the seventh year, in her seventh letter, Legend writes back to her, basically inviting her to come. She is given three invitations, one for her fiance, one for herself, and one for her sister. Obviously, Scarlett's excited. She's wanted this her entire life, basically, and she finally has a chance to go. But as she thinks about getting there, she realizes that she can't. Essentially, every time that she and her sister try to leave the island, they get in trouble with their father. They have really no way of getting to the location, and Scarlett doesn't know anything about her fiance, only that he is a count. So she has no way of really telling him, hey, I have these invitations, let's go to Caraval. And then the final issue is that their wedding coincides with the timing of Caraval. So she's like, I can't be in two places at once. And she begins to abandon her dream of wanting to, or rather getting to Caraval. Unfortunately, Scarlett tells her younger sister about the invitations, and Tella basically has other plans. She's like, we're going, but she doesn't really say that to her. She has an attractive sailor help her kidnap Scarlett so they can get to Caraval, where nothing is as it seems. Now, I like this novel for a lot of different reasons. The first is that it's fast paced. Second is that I really liked Scarlett. I thought that she was a very strong female lead, which is exciting. You don't see a lot of that in literature. Now, I like Scarlett because she's not only strong, but she's relatable. She's someone I can respect because she's wary and cautious. She doesn't trust other people easily, and she's not someone who's just gonna, be reckless and make dumb decisions. She also does her best to protect her younger sister Donatella from both physical and emotional harm, which I find to be very commendable. And third, she gets to a point in the novel where instead of running from her fears, she faces them head on. She's still wary, but she's willing to combat that a little more as the novel progresses, which is nice because, she's not a static character, which is an issue with a lot of literature these days. I also like that she proved to be both determined and resilient because she wasn't going to let anything get in the way of her winning Caraval and the award associated with that. I also thought the prose was very strong and beautiful. I thought it flowed well and it told Scarlett's story very well, and it made it harder for me to put the book down. Also, like that the story was not predictable. I never really knew what was going to happen next, and that's not something I see a lot, so that was exciting. And then finally, I liked how Garber was able to combine a lot of different genres together. For example, like dark fantasy, dark fairy tales, and romance. With that being said, there were a few things which I didn't like about the novel. The first was that it could be extremely redundant. For example, Garber mentions the fact that Scarlett needs to protect her sister or feels the need to protect her sister on a regular basis. She also mentions that Legend likes to make girls fall in love with him pretty regularly. Second, Donatella's character is just freaking infuriating. I could not stand her. She's vain, she's thoughtless, she's reckless and convinced she knows everything. She's one of those little siblings. She can be very selfish, she's prone to making poor decisions. She's essentially the opposite of Scarlett. Scarlett's always looking out for her and doing her best to keep Donatella safe, but Donatella doesn't care. She constantly misbehaves, which causes their father to punish Scarlett for Donatella's actions. She doesn't bother trying to look out for Scarlett at all, even though Scarlett's looking out for her. I was honestly surprised Scarlett put up with so much. I love my sister, but if that's how she treated me, I probably wouldn't have made so much of an effort. Basically, Donatella just lacks redeeming qualities. She's obnoxious. I was not a fan. The final thing I really didn't like about this novel was that the ending was extremely long, it was dramatic, it was drawn out, and it was basically unnecessary. If you clipped like 20 pages from that, 25, it would have been perfect. Even so, I really looked forward to reading the next few books in the novel, the series rather, and I gave this a 4.6 out of 5. The next novel is Legendary, which I do have to show you. It essentially picks up where Caraval leaves off, and it involves Tella, she becomes the main character in this one, paying back a debt that she had accrued in Caraval. It requires her to take place in the next Caraval and try to find out Legend's true name, his real name. Now, I like this novel too. It was fast paced. Again, there was that nice combination of different genre elements like, fantasy and romance. But there were a few things which I didn't like. The prose was still strong, but it was riddled with a lot of grammatical and punctuation type errors. For example, spellings, omitted words, stuff like that, which kept it from flowing quite as well as it did in the first novel. With that being said, it did create a very clear picture of this dark and magical world, and I was swept into that story. Like I said previously, I found it a lot harder to like Tella than her older sister. And like I said, I feel that's way because Donatella is really selfish. She's self-absorbed. She's a compulsive liar. For example, she lies to her sister about the nature of her relationship with Dante. You know, she just doesn't have redeeming qualities. And those qualities are constantly being exposed in this novel, and I felt like that was an issue. With that being said, Tella is extremely relatable because who hasn't told a lie? Who hasn't broken rules? It's something that everybody does. Third, I was disturbed by the unhealthy depictions of romantic relationships between the Dragna sisters and the leading men in this novel. And I was discomforted by these depictions because they suggest that Garber maintains an unhealthy view of male-female relations. Furthermore, it also suggests that women cannot have healthy relationships with men, which obviously isn't the case. And I've basically come to this conclusion because of the negativity that surrounded each sister's relationship with the novel's leading men. For example, the sisters were often depicted as feeling helpless, unsafe, and uncomfortable when around the novel's leading men. They were also described as feeling frustrated by the fact that the men never seemed to tell them the truth. And lastly, the extreme amount of jealousy that Dante felt whenever Tella was around Jax was alarming because it hinted at Dante's possessive nature and a sense that Tella belonged to him. This characterization ties into the fact that the novel's men appear to view both girls as objects to be fought over, as opposed to people with their own thoughts and their own will. The Dragna sisters' status as objects is made apparent when one considers how the men talk about them. For example, there's a point in the novel when Julian is speaking to Scarlet, and he says, "I'm trying everything I can to keep you," and that's on page 229. The word keep is a term that refers to one maintaining ownership over something, as in an object. So essentially, Julian's reducing Scarlet to an object when he says this. And it suggests that he's more interested in the status or pleasure she can provide him with than her love. Again, like with the first novel, I found some of this novel's darker elements to be discomforting. Examples include blood pouring from Tella's ears and blood dripping from the tips of her fingers. Again, a few more things that I liked was that, I felt myself being swept away, even though this was a lot more predictable than the first novel. I liked that there was that nice weave of different elements from literature. And I liked how Garber complicated Legendary's narrative by tempting Tella with numerous dark paths. Instead of everything working out according to her plan, Garber ensured that something was gained and something was lost, which kept me invested in the novel and Tella's future, even though I didn't really like Tella. And ultimately, I looked forward to reading the conclusion of the series, and I gave this novel a 4.2 out of 5. The last novel is simply called Finale. Here it is. I don't want to give anything away, so I'm just going to say it basically wraps up the series and all the love triangles and all that stuff was going on. What I liked It was fast paced. There was always something going on. I liked the introduction of the new characters and the new arcs that involved some of the older characters that were already established. Um, I did see some more of the unhealthy depictions of male female relationships, which I mentioned specifically for Legendary. But I felt like Garber did make some effort to make them seem a little bit healthier in some cases, not so much in others. Still a little concerned with how those relationships were depicted. With that being said, there were a lot of things I did not like about this one. I thought the prose was the weakest in the series. This was just not as well written as the other ones. I also felt like the novel got a little redundant. Like Caraval had been, it would restate old conversations, thoughts, and ideas such as how immortals could or could not feel. Um, I also felt like the dialogue was just like a little bit off, for lack of a better word. In other words, it didn't seem as though the speaker would or even should have said what they said or done what they did. I'm not sure why I feel that way, but I couldn't really shake that feeling that something wasn't quite right for the entirety of the novel. Second, I felt as though the novel failed to weave the different genres together like it had done, or like Garber had done previously. Um, I mean, it did contain a lot of strong fantasy elements, but ultimately I felt like it was dominated by romance, and I am not the biggest fan of romance. Like, I'll have a touch of it in a novel, but I don't want it to be the main feature. Um, I also didn't appreciate the fact that this novel was dominated by Tella's actions and chapters from Tella's perspective because I just don't like her as much as Scarlet. I don't find her as interesting. She's just not as much fun. Not a fan. I also felt like this novel was predictable and some of the new characters really didn't seem to have much of a purpose. So I was kind of wondering why they were included. Um, I also felt like it was a little drawn out. I think it could have benefited from a slight reduction in length. But overall, I felt like it was a decent conclusion to the Caraval novels. But again, it still felt like the weakest in the series. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. The series as a whole, I would give something like a 3.7 to a 4. It's kind of hard because I really think the first two were strong, but the last one kind of murders it. Yeah, not my favorite. Anyway, hope you guys like listening. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon. Have a good one. Bye.